Welcome to the Everyday Fitness and Wellbeing podcast. In this episode, I speak to Whosyourglamma, aka Bec George, about being an MMA mum, grandma, and her positive mindset towards coping with disability. In this conversation, Bex shares her story of coping with Hemihypertrophy and later discovering she has a rare condition known as EDS. We delve into her unique gym and nutrition strategy to complement her plastic surgery, weight loss surgery, and live life approach towards her disability. Plus tales of a mother and a coach to a young MMA fighter. She's straight talking, so there's the odd F-bomb towards the end, and do excuse a few technical hiccups with the audio. However, I think you'll be inspired, or at least have a pause for thought along the way. Hope you enjoy. Let's go. Excellent. So, Bex, hi, thanks for doing this.
No worries, thank you for having me.
No, really appreciate it. Now, the reason I wanted to speak to you is because I haven't spoken to you in a while, but I thought by doing this podcast, we could share some of your experience. I mean, for one, your experience as a MMA mum.
Sure.
Being the mother of a very talented young man, Jake, who I had the pleasure of training in some of those early days, along with yourself, and also your experience with your disability and condition, and refusing to take no for an answer and kicking it into touch and being stubborn and determined or whatever. Let's hear a little bit more about your story. So Melbourne and...
Yeah, I was brought up in Melbourne. The kids and I then lived on the coast of Victoria for about 8 years before moving here. And I hadn't had a diagnosis of anything back then. However, there had been issues. I'd had MRIs that had shown up some lesions on my brain but weren't enough to be MS, and then they said they didn't know what was wrong for a long time.
So if I pause you there, when was this? Was this the birth of one of the children, or?
Well, I don't know what triggered it. I was born with what's called Hemihypertrophy, so my whole left side, as you know, is smaller than my right anyway. So, there was always going to be a strain on joints, etc. But I'd been experiencing, look, I can remember way back in my teenage years, extreme fatigue that was abnormal fatigue, joint pain. However, I was a gymnast for many years, so, I could always attribute it to something different. And I'd always worked full-time, and I was a single parent, and, there's a number of things that you can put fatigue down to.
Yeah, sure.
So we sort of went through this process and sort of fast forward to moving here. I'd sort of just got on with it. However, I started dislocating or subluxing, which is, not a full dislocation. And my GP had sent me to, I cannot tell you how many specialists I'd been to, that still couldn't come up anything or piece the dots together. And then they said, you've got rheumatoid arthritis. And I was lucky my GP was a bit switched on. He said, well, that hasn't come up on a blood test because that's a standard test for rheumatoid.
Right.
I had all the symptoms. So he said, I'm not happy with that. Sent me to a rheumatologist at Norwich and Norfolk Hospital.
Yeah.
And she did this whole range of tests called a Baton score, which is a bendy test, I call it. So they make you pull your fingers back and bend over and how far you can bend. And at that stage, I was a 9 out of a 9 for a Baton score.
Right.
And she said to me that you have hypermobility, which was later changed to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Now, the easiest way to explain what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome alone is it's a connective tissue disorder, and what it does is your body produces faulty collagen, which, of course, collagen is the glue to your body, so it affects every organ, every joint, all your muscles. So if you have lax collagen, for example, that's what causes, obviously, dislocations because it's not holding your muscles. They're not building properly, holding them in place. I will slowly go blind, I think. Every year my eyesight gets worse because your eyes are covered in collagen. Every organ, is made up of collagen in some way, shape or form. So it affects every part of your body, from your nervous system to your digestive system. And it's not a question of, oh, we'll just take collagen, because what someone with EDS does is if you take a collagen supplement, the body just converts it to more faulty collagen. So it's degenerative, and often comes with a string of other things. So for me, I also have osteoarthritis in most of my body, and I have fibromyalgia, which causes more pain than anything else. But that's very common for EDSs to have it. So
just for the listeners, there's a lot there, which is... I remember when I first met you, in fact, that certainly the joint laxity that you were talking about, we really had to be careful with some of the movements. But the full title of ED...
it's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Yeah. And so you feel that you were born with, just scrolling back again, even while you were a gymnast, you just felt you were, how old were you when you were doing gymnastics?
I started at 2.5 and I finished quite sort of into my late teens.
Right.
So being flexible was great back then, you know.
Indeed.
Being hypermobile was a bonus, you know. And still at 46, I can still do the splits and stuff like that. So, you know, that was great then. However, what it forces you to do is overextend your joints, which causes the problems. But you don't obviously realise this at the time. It's not until, you know, later down the line that you realise that being flexible is not actually a great thing to be.
Double-edged sword, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, sorry to have interrupted you there. So you'd said that you'd had some good help from the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. And,
I did.
And they changed the diagnosis.
They did.
And from there on, this time frame wise, this was
4 years ago. My diagnosis was. It was actually 4 years ago, round about now.
Okay, right. After all this time, so
yep, took that long.
And from then on, what happened? What?
It's been an up and down process. I'm not going to lie. They do say that people take a lot of time to grieve about, you know, what you are going to be able to do and what you aren't. And my prognosis was long term that I would end up in a wheelchair, and I just really rebutted that. That's not happening for me anytime soon. I am really quite adamant about my health in terms of my physicality and what I can do and what I can't do.
Yeah.
And I'm a bit of a ball breaker when it comes to excuses about what people can and can't do. I'm also, you know, I know. Look, I know other people who are a lot further down the line than I am.
Okay.
And who legitimately can't do a lot for themselves.
Yeah.
However, they are also people like me who don't believe in the woe is me stuff. So I think that mental health and grieving for what your body isn't the same. But it did take me 3 years. I did really fight it, the fact that I wasn't very well. Yeah. And I did have periods of time in the beginning where I was bedridden for 3 months at one stage. It has a huge impact on your relationships. And these are the things that people don't talk about when you have a disability, especially when you have an invisible disability, because I look fine.
Yeah.
You know, I look 100% fine on the outside. But I have a rheumatologist now in London where we now live. And I also have an orthopaedic surgeon down here as well that I deal with, because I'm probably going to have a hip replacement soon. That's just wear and tear, and that is what it is. But for me, the way that I deal with it is exercise and becoming a weightlifter, really. That was my way of, keeping my muscles strong, as strong as it can be. And it's quite frustrating because it takes double the time, triple the time to build muscle that a normal person does. But I'm too stubborn to end up in a wheelchair before I have to. That's my personal view on it, So sure. I think positivity and focusing on what you can do rather than what you can't do is more beneficial for me, because we have quite a frenetic life, as you know. So I don't really, and I can't afford the luxury to not be busy all the time. So my being positive is a huge thing. I don't care what anyone says. Your head state is, is really half of the battle. Is half of the battle.
Oh, that's fantastic. The making the most of life and staying positive.
I think so. Look, I've always said this, and I've said this to my kids, my boyfriend, everything, is that I'm in pain every day anyway. So whether I do something or whether I don't do something, I'm going to be in pain. So for me, having an experience and being in pain is better than watching TV at home. I'm not very good at. I'm kind of the person that goes and goes and goes and then might crash for a day, rather than pacing myself. But everybody deals with this completely differently.
Sure.
But like I said, I'm in pain anyway. So, I'm not going to let that particular pain stop me. I'm not very good with the pain drugs, the ones that they gave me.
No.
So I take, supplements and stuff, codeine when I have to, only when I have to, and sort of just grin and bear it, really.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I think you've come a long way, Bex, to be talking about building muscle, because certainly when we were training those years ago, it was about preventing injury. It was more about stopping you bloody dislocating. So now all of a sudden you're quite a gym fiend, actually. I see plenty of your stuff on Instagram, and maybe at this point maybe even introduce Jake a little bit about him, but I want to stick with you and find out a little bit about what you are doing at the gym now.
I don't do a lot of cardio. I've concentrated mostly on lifting weights, and I'm aiming to lift higher and higher. I still have to have a lot of things adjusted, and I'm really lucky that the gym that I'm at, my PT, if I say I want to do something, he doesn't say, oh, no, we can't do that, this might happen. He'll say, right, let's adjust it. And I'll give an example is, I can't do a full squat because my knees and my hip will dislocate. That's not even a given. Yeah. So I box squat. I mean, that's just how it is. So everything is adaptable.
Yeah.
And everything is adaptable. It's just finding a way and a solution of doing it. And I told you previously that, I found out I was anemic not long ago, amongst other things. That kind of knocked me. So I'm building up my strength again.
Yeah.
But it's been finding things that I can do and learning how to do them without extending. And, we're going to talk about Jake, but he's my biggest support, really, because he lifts weights as well. And he never tells me I can't do anything. The only time he's ever told me to stop is when I've gone back after my recent surgery, and he just said, you're not lifting that heavy, Mum. That's it, But, he's my biggest support, and we do it together. We are a team in the gym.
Excellent. I really like what you said about focusing, and you repeated it, about focusing on what you can do.
Yep.
As opposed to, oh, I can't this, I can't that. And that's just such, well, that's a motto. That's something to post, really, one of those famous quotes.
I think it's really important. Like I said, it took me a while to grieve to the fact that I was sick. However, at the point when I decided that life had to go on, that was about finding ways of doing things. But there's always something you can do, always.
Sure.
And finding people to support you is the most important thing, that believe in what you do. I mean, you helped with that in the very beginning, and like I said, down here, there's never been a question at the gym about, well, I don't think you should do that. There's always just been an adjustment. So, yeah.
No, you always did back then have the right mental attitude, not just to blow smoke up your backside, but but that's half the battle. Is what I'm trying to say is there's a mindset thing.
Absolutely.
Of positivity and looking at the bigger picture of why they're doing it, as opposed to focusing too much on the negative. Now, also when I met you, you were struggling a little bit with your weight, from what I remember.
I was. I think I must have been, when I met you, I must have been maybe a year into having a gastric sleeve.
That's
so I'd
right,
had
yeah.
lost. So it must have been about a year in. So for those who don't know what a gastric sleeve is, basically they remove 85% of your stomach and create a new one. So obviously it creates restriction, therefore losing weight. So I had that done, and that was a huge adjustment of diet and exercise and a whole range of things. But since then, I'm 4 years down the line. I remember you saying to me, my goal weight was 70 kilos. That was my goal weight. And I remember you saying to me, I reckon you can get to 65. And I think at my lowest, I think I got down to about 60.5. And my gastric surgeon actually said, no, you need to put back on some weight. So I think I currently sit, I'm not really focused, to be honest. I sit at about between 62 and 64 at the moment, and I'm happy with that given that I lift quite heavy weights, but I'm a sort of an 8 to 10, so I go on my clothes more than I go on the scales now.
Rightly so, yeah.
In total, I think I lost about 100 pounds, and as you know, I've now started the plastic surgery route, so I've had my tummy and my arms done, so to remove a lot of excess skin, and in November I'm having my leg lift done, so the same thing, it's just removing a whole lot of skin, and I'm having my boobs done, because, what girl doesn't want boobs back again? So
there we are.
That's been done. So my weight, in terms of weight loss, I've hit my goal, and I've maintained it now for 2 years, so...
Okay, let's... this is fascinating. I still want to talk about you, and we may have to do a part 2 and talk about Jake. All right, so what led into that gastric sleeve? I know it means you casting your mind back, but...
Yeah, I'll answer anything you like. I'm an open book. I'd struggled with my weight all my life, up and down, up and down. I'd done everything, to be really honest, from diet pills to speed to all sorts of stuff to lower my weight. I'd also suffered with bulimia for most of my life, being a gymnast, and then that doesn't go away, unfortunately. And I had treatment in my late 30s for that. And now I do not suffer with that anymore, I can say. Yeah. But it had been I could not control my weight. My hormones were a bit out of whack. There was a whole range of things that I just couldn't get it under control. So I was very lucky that I said to my family, I can't do this on my own. My sister had a band. My auntie had a band. I didn't want a band. I wanted to see what the other options were.
Right.
So I was lucky enough that my family helped to finance it, because you cannot get it on the NHS. It's impossible. Even now, if you're morbidly obese, there's huge loops to go through. So I went and had the gastric sleeve done, jumped in with a leap of faith, and I'll be really honest and say I never thought that it would work to the degree that it did. I never thought I'd get to this point. It was because I'd been so sceptical about weight loss, I really never thought I'd hit my goal. So to get to kind of 4 years down the track, it's been life-changing in lots of ways. Health-wise, hugely. It was funny because I had that, and then 4 months later found out about my Ehlers-Danlos. So, obviously losing weight has helped with stress on the joints and things like that. Yeah. But just from a lifestyle point of view, and it's interesting how people view you after you lose weight. And, it was part of a reason for my marriage breakdown, really, was my weight loss. He couldn't deal with that. So people don't think about stuff like that, but it's common. It's very, very common. Yeah. But the only health problems I have because of it is I have gastric reflux, which I have for life. Yeah. And things like that. For me, I don't regret it one little bit. It's been the best thing that I ever did. Wow. Yeah, the most amazing thing that I ever did. So if anyone's thinking about it, I would just do it, really.
Okay. Yeah. However, now you're at the gym how many times a week, and what is your nutrition? Given that you're pushing weights, and how does pushing weights affect, one, your condition, although you have spoken a little bit about that already. Yeah. But how does it affect your abdominal and that whole area as well, and your digestive system? What's going on?
Well, my diet, because of Jake, which we'll get into in a minute, I have been a fight mum for so many years now, so nutrition for him has been integral, and I pretty much followed him. And up until this year, we followed a really high-fat, high-protein diet with very little carbs, and whatever carbs he had were, decent carbs, sweet potato, basmati rice, but in very small quantities. So I still follow that. I don't deal very well with my stomach, which is part of my EDS, with carbs. My body doesn't process them very well, so apart from it being a dietary thing, I just don't cope with them very well, so I don't eat a lot of them.
Okay.
So I eat a lot of meat, a lot of red meat, a lot of eggs. There are still some days, even with my sleeve, that restriction kicks in where I can't eat a lot, so I have to eat really nutrient or protein dense food. Rather than quantity, I eat a lot of eggs, a lot of spinach. I love blueberries. They're my addiction. Jake says they're like my crack. So I eat that many. Which is not to say there are some days where I don't go and eat what I like, and if we're out, I'll eat what I like. I'm not a Nazi like that.
Sure.
But for me and my body, that's how it works. I do drink things during my workouts like BCAAs and things like that, because I find all of that stuff for me helps with muscle repair and muscle fatigue and stuff like that. In terms of lifting, how does it help with my stomach? You're talking surgery-wise, or do you mean internally?
Both, yeah. Let's...
Yeah, well, I'm still, because I'm only, what am I now? 10 weeks out from having my tummy tuck. I still have to be mindful about the level of things like when I'm doing leg presses and anything like that, because internally it's still healing.
Box squats, I'd imagine, as well.
Yeah, but my stomach is flat. It's absolutely deadpan flat now, which is ace. I'm not going to lie about that. So I can't wait to do that. But if we go back quickly to nutrition, I am a big advocate of a protein shake, purely for me, because if I can't eat a whole lot of protein shake, is an easy way for me to have a meal without feeling like I'm going to be sick, because that often happens with weight loss surgery, whether you have a band or whether you have a sleeve. That restriction can kick in sometimes, and if you eat too much, you're just sick.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's it. But, the positive thing is they encourage you after weight loss surgery now to have a high-protein, high-fat diet, which is everything against what our generation was taught about, eating low-fat and everything like that.
Sure.
However, every diet is so different to everyone, as you know. Everyone's body will,
sure.
A high-fat, high-protein diet does not suit some people. A high-carb diet suits other people. We've just found that this works, for me.
What about your vegetables? And I know you mentioned spinach there, but certainly with a high protein or certainly high meat, you're going to need good amount of fibre to push that through. Or is that kind of restricted because of the surgery, or not the surgery, the gastric band?
I mean, I eat a lot of salady stuff. I eat tomatoes. I eat pretty much whatever veggies I like. We eat loads of asparagus, loads of broccoli for a start.
Okay.
And broccoli is a great source of protein anyway, without having to have all the meat. Lots of greens, loads and loads of greens.
Oh, that's reassuring. Okay, so plenty of greens. That's really reassuring. Supplements, you say you take a few supplements, perhaps a few branched chain amino acids, that sort of thing. But medication, is it a whole...
Look, it's a minefield with medication as to what works, what doesn't. Last year when I got diagnosed with the fibromyalgia, they wanted to put me on what's called pregabalin and another one called amitriptyline, and there's a whole other, basically beta blockers, obviously, that assist with pain and things like that. However, pregabalin made me extremely ill, and I put on a stone in a week, and it was horrendous. And the amitriptyline, I have still to help me when I need to go to sleep, because one of the things that you get with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is your central nervous system is affected, and so your adrenal glands, and you run on very high adrenaline. So often getting to sleep is impossible some days. So, and there's no way of stopping that, unfortunately. It's just that's why it's one of the reasons why you're so fatigued, is because, you know, you're constantly, your adrenaline's running. So I take amitriptyline, which is like a sedative and an antidepressant all rolled into one. Very rarely, but when I can't sleep. I don't take anything else. I might take some light pain relief if I'm in a lot of pain. And the only other thing I do take is a beta blocker, which does help slightly with my adrenaline, and that I have very low blood pressure, unfortunately. So I'm really have to be careful about what I take.
Right.
For me, the drugs that they prescribe, and there's a whole range, the ones that I've mentioned are just a few, the benefits do not outweigh the horrible that they make you feel. So they're not an option for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, they're really, for me, they're not an option. So I just don't take them. I just deal with it in other ways. Vitamins and bits and pieces like we've talked about before. And you know, there's things that I know that they're going to trigger, and this is one of my things, and I'm really open about. It's my hormones trigger my joint pain for my EDS and my arthritis. So this year I had a Marina coil fitted so that I could regulate everything, and it has made a massive difference for me because my hormonal fluctuations are not as severe, therefore they don't cause that horrendous pain every month.
Right.
So that's it. You know, and that's why I'm quite proactive in finding other ways of dealing with bits and pieces as an alternative, you know. So
that's very honest, very honest. You open book.
I think you have to be. I think the thing is, when you have a disability and an illness, there's so much that people don't talk about, and I think sharing information is hugely important. About the positive things that have worked might not work for somebody, but it might certainly help for somebody else.
Okay, I'll put in the notes for the podcast the email address of perhaps a society for your
I'll send you through one.
Please, that, and hopefully it can help somebody or a relative, etc. Have you tried any natural approaches instead of traditional medicine, alternative medicine?
I haven't, in terms of supplement-wise, it's funny you should say that. I have an osteopath who I go and see, and he's also a homeopathic doctor, but he doesn't practice as one. He just practices as an osteopath to help keep everything aligned and moving, and, you know, he does the old sticks needles in me to make sure my energy's flowing well and things like that. Yeah. So he actually said, it's funny you should bring this up, he's booked me in to go and see him to be treated as a homeopathic patient to help me boost my immune system and things like that in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I'm open to trying anything. So other than vitamins, no, I haven't.
Okay.
Is the answer. In terms of therapy and stuff, my osteopath is my life, really. He's,
sure,
you know, to keep things aligned and things. But I'm certainly open to trying anything.
Sure,
you know,
sure.
I have no aversion to it. I'm a big believer in mixing, you know, traditional and non-traditional medicines to find something that works.
Sure. Let's talk about Jake, your son.
Yes.
One of two, isn't it?
He is, yeah. I've got Jake who's 18, nearly 19, and Gabriel, who's still living in Norwich, he'll be 23 this year. But Jake is my baby, my 6'2", 100-kilo baby, who, you know, because we were training together. So
exactly, and he was quite young. So if he's 19 now, he must have been about 15, 14.
Yeah, I think 15. He would have been about 15 then. Yeah.
And you were driving him all over the place. I mean, for one, you asked me to help him with some of his personal training, or at least be part of the team behind him. Yeah. And you were quite very passionate, strongly passionate. And you weren't letting your disability be an obstacle to getting him to training on the East Coast. No. So how did that start? When did he have an interest?
Basically, look, he was, when we were in Australia, he was 7, and he'll kill me for this. He'd get the rug out on the floor in front of UFC and pretend it was the cage, And I hear you saying at 7, I'm going to fight MMA. And
okay, just lost you there. So at 7 years old, watching
7 years watching UFC saying, I'm going to be in the UFC, Mum. And you just go, yes, darling, of course. Like all your kids. All kids have, what they want to do. And if you fast forward to moving here, basically in Australia there was no kids MMA or anything like that. You could do karate. He tried that, it was boring him. He'd always excelled at sports. He'd played baseball. He'd done a lot of non-standard sports anyway. Aussie rules football, stuff like that. Moved here, he turned 12 and he found a club quite close to us in Norwich that at that time was Kickstop MMA, and they'd produced quite a few really good fighters. And he there, and as you know, Jake's very tall, and they thought he was 14. So they let him start training with the men, and then they found out he was 12. And they said, by that stage, he'd been training with the men anyway, and they said, well, you might as well stay. He'd never trained a kids class in his life, ever. So he started training MMA techniques, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all the basics and stuff. Started doing some interclubs and some, small tournaments and things like that. I was adamant there was no headshots to happen for a long time, even though he was sparring in training.
I remember you saying that, but carry on, Yeah,
at 13, he did his first cage fight. Again, it was no groundwork, it was purely standing, no headshots. And I think people think that's a little bit pathetic, but it takes a lot more skill to submit someone than it does to punch them out. So, for a long time he had to work very hard. We then moved to Cromer, and we moved him to a club at Cromer, I should say, Fighting Fit under John Rossetti, who's still an amazing coach and still a friend.
So you cut out a bit there. The name of the coach again?
John Rossetti at Fighting Fit in Cromer.
Okay.
So, and I think he was there when we were coming to you.
That's
but
right.
At that stage, he got in contact. There was then his manager, Chris Figg, who's an amazing manager here in London, who deals with a lot of the huge MMA fighters here. And during that time, I mean, obviously there was some other fights in between. He'd lost some and he'd won a lot, and he'd made a name for himself as a junior anyway. And he was then asked to train in London under one of the biggest teams down here called Titan. So that became quite epic and an opportunity. So we started to drive from Norwich to London 4 days a week, and he was still at school at this stage. So it was chaotic, really, training, coordinating, doing all of that stuff. And he'd had a few fights and was still training. And then, as you know, at 16, he found out he was going to become a dad. So that kind of it didn't slow anything down hugely, but it did have him rethink. However, within that time, we made the decision to relocate to London so he could continue with his training. So we moved 2 years ago. We moved to London in the October, and then the December, Christmas Eve, Milo, his little boy, was born. Mm-hmm. So that was a pretty epic event in his life to become a teenage father. So
and your life too, no doubt.
And my life, I love my grandchild. He's my world. But Jake continued to train, but obviously had a bit of a break, had a massive fight, fought K1 this year rather than MMA in Norwich, and just had an epic knockout. But he's at the moment, his dream, I don't know if he wants to do MMA necessarily full-time for a while. He still wants to train and he still wants to fight. He's now training under Kieran Kettle at Double K, which is in Bromley, which is Kieran's, probably the best Muay Thai K1 coach ever in the country. So we've been lucky enough, and Jake's been lucky enough, to be trained by some of the best and have some of the best fighters, as friends and stuff. That passion for it has never gone away. So what he's doing at the moment, though, we decided this year, after having to diet for 6 years to fight and maintain a fight weight, he said, Mum, I just want to have a little bit of a break. So he's weightlifting, and he's like powerful weightlifting at the moment. So his weight is way up above what he normally would be. And I get that because, you know, from the age of 13 to 18, he had to control that weight and that portion. So his diet now, he eats a lot more of a bodybuilding diet, a lot more carbs, all of that sort of stuff. So his now focus is he will train. He's now working full-time in security, and his goal is to get into the fire brigade, the London Fire Brigade, because it's not just him now. He's got Milo to think about. And, you know, he's still, you know, he'll be 19 this year. He's still really young with a 2-year-old. So his passion for the fight game is never going to go. He'll always be in there in some capacity, you know. And he motivates me hugely. His passion and his drive, and he's always been one of these kids who put a plan in action and he just does it. And he's excelled at whatever he's done, you know. So for him, you know, he keeps me motivated to keep going and to not give into this stupid illness and things like that by having the faith in me, really, that I can do more than I can do at the gym. And I know that sounds really like airy-fairy shit, but that's so how it is, you know. And I look at him, that for a young kid, I know there's loads of teenage dads, but he's really stepped up and, you know, become just a really decent human, really. I mean, he's still a teenager, don't get me wrong. He can still be a pain in the ass, completely. However, 99% of the time, he's focused. He's incredibly focused, you know, and that will still remain with his fight training, you know.
Sure. Young Jake, now a father, and in the past, what would have driven him? Was it just a passion? Now it's changed, obviously, with Milo, his son, coming along. But what would you say? What would you say motivated him back then?
I think his motivation was to get to the UFC originally, either, you know, or one of those big organisations, and he was going to do it. And he knew that he had the skills, you know, and that he is a good fighter, you know, and it's a shame. Some people have said that comes across as arrogance, but, you know, Jake's very quiet, as you know, and quite, you know,
very much.
You know, he comes. It's not that, but he has a total belief in himself.
You have to.
And I think he.
Sorry, I was only going to interrupt. I'm not an MMA fighter, but there's certain traits across several sports, or personality traits, that is, and I would imagine with MMA, you need to have that confidence if you're going to step in a cage.
100%. I think I'm quite a rarity I was quite a rarity in sport in terms of MMA for being an MMA mum, because more fathers take their children obviously to training, whereas there's me. I've done it from day one. I've been the one who's, you know, controlled every aspect of that. And I think because he knows that I had 100% belief in what he did, and that he had the ability, that he could just crack on. Like, he didn't have to convince me, you know, and the people who believed in him around him. But he honestly believes that, you know, he's got the skills.
Okay. While we're talking about being an MMA mum, cast your mind back right to the start, up to now. What would you advise to another parent in your position? What would you suggest to another MMA mum?
Take no shit. If you think that, you know, your child...
Yeah, so we're cutting out there. So you were saying, for an MMA mum, take no shit whatsoever.
No, take no shit. It is a very male-dominated sport, obviously. I think the thing is that if you think that someone's going too rough on your child, that you really need to... It's not a question of toughening them the fuck up. That's not it at all. It's like, it's not about beating the crap out of each other. It's about learning skills. So if you think, and I have had many, you know, nose-to-nose arguments with other coaches and fighters, that your child is being too roughly treated or the training's too rough, you need to stand up and say something, because a proper coach will not do that to your child. We've had incidents with Jake, and we're talking years ago, where a particular fighter took it upon himself to, decide to kick Jake's legs out from underneath him. And Jake was like 13 or 14, and that was acceptable to them. And I went nuts. So you really have to stand your ground. You have to be quite ballsy to be a mother in this game, because unlike other sports like soccer or even like Muay Thai and K1, there's loads of mums, that do that, and they're awesome, which is so nice to have them around now. But MMA is still one of those growing sports that women as parents and coaches are few and far between. You just have to be strong enough to, like I said, stand your ground, really. Your child is your child, and they're an asset, really. And any decent coach worth their money will listen to you as a parent and your concerns,
That must be tough, trying to stand your ground when you've got a coach perhaps looking at you as, oh, look, you've got your mum involved. She doesn't understand. She's just being too open.
I've had a coach say to me one day, "What are you going to do? Protect him until he's 18?" And I said, "Yeah, if I have to. When he's 18, he can do what he likes." Coaches who didn't agree with me because I wouldn't let Jake do headshots till he was 16. I was adamant. And Jake respected that. He didn't even argue with me about that. Why let your child be punched in the head before is absolutely necessary, Once he turned 16, I respected Jake enough to know that, he was old enough and skilled enough to deal with that, but it's just about knowing your boundaries like you do with any coach.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing. It'll be nice to speak to Jake, and do say hello. So finally then, this podcast is about everyday fitness and well-being, and MMA is a growing sport, and certainly a lot of the martial arts. So there's going to be other parents like you. So that's why I thought it was important to ask that question. Also, we've looked at your life story, or just a snapshot of your life story, and coping with disability, and using fitness to improve your health and maintain your health. So there's a lot of advice, noise, BS out there about about everyday fitness. What are your thoughts, and how, if we try and summarize, what would you tell the listeners? Sort of.
My first thing is, age is never a barrier to starting some sort of fitness.
Yeah.
Ever. I turned 46 this year, and I'm probably the healthiest and in best shape that I've ever been for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And it's finding something that you like to do, really. Just because, Instagram says, you should be doing this, this and this, or you should look a certain way. I can't run anyway because my joints, but, running's not for me. You need to find something that you like to do, that you enjoy. If you're not going to enjoy it, you're not going to stick at it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. With that. And for your well-being, you used you found the gym useful for pain management. And anything else? Do you bother with any mindfulness? Do you bother with any?
I do. I mean, I'm a really big fan of a whole lot of things. Tony Robbins is obviously the most common one that people know, and things like that. But I'm a huge fan of sticking the headphones on, finding something on YouTube, and all about positive stuff, really. And I can do that, when I'm lying at home, when I'm in the gym. I'm a huge believer in crystals and all sorts of things that people say is airy-fairy.
Okay.
But, it's not stuff that I would advertise, because people say, well, you're pretty blunt. How can you believe in that stuff as well? But in terms of mindfulness, absolutely. Meditation, and it's not just about sitting there and doing the Om thing. Just grab your headphones. YouTube is one of the best things that you can find anything you like on. Stick your headphones in and listen. You don't have to do the really hardcore stuff. It can be simplified. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think so for me, I have to keep positive.
Yeah. I definitely agree with the making whatever activity useful for your own mindfulness or mental health, whether it's walking. People walk the dog, and I've mentioned this in other podcasts as well, you know, the runner's high. So for some runners, yeah, I can see that. I've done that myself. And yet it can be as simple as standing and washing the dishes or doing some other
That's exactly right.
Okay, listen, Bex, do you want people to contact you if they've got any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you through my email, and anyone can contact me about anything. I'm pretty open about most things in to do with my health and my condition and things like that. Anything from, things about being obviously the parent to a teen parent, that comes up quite a lot, and how we dealt with that. I have no issues. So yeah, I'll forward that through, and you're more than welcome to pass that on.
Sure. And they can get in contact with you via Instagram, I presume, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know my Instagram, so you can stick that up on, and you can see pretty much my life on Instagram, as you know. So it's all there.
Fair play. Excellent. Lovely to speak to you. I'm going to just pause here. Take care then.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Bye.
Bye. And there we have it. Quite a life story, all crammed into 45 minutes. I mentioned a few links which you'll find on the show notes and on my website, seannewton.co.uk. And of course, if you want to contact Bex about anything from support with EDS, about being a mother of a teenage parent, weight loss or plastic surgery, then catch her on Instagram at Whosyourglamma, that's one word, or Whosyourglamma at hotmail.com. Whosyourglamma is Whosyourglamma. As ever, thanks for listening, and watch out for the YouTube uploads of the podcast series coming up, plus new mini fitness shorts, kind of small 5-10 minute podcast episodes that some people have requested. As ever, thanks again. Cheers.